or will be watching us throughout the YouTube channel. It is a pleasure for me to be hosting these BK Talks today, especially because I am going to do very little. So I'm going to immediately give the word to Saskia van Steen, who will be moderating the talks tonight. The reason why we are meeting all here today is because the Faculty of Architecture here at Delft is hosting the exhibition of the projects presented for Archiprix. So it's a pleasure for us to, first of all, be hosting the exhibition in the Orange Hall, and to be having this discussion about architecture, education, the future of design, etc., etc. Without further ado, I want to give the word to Saskia, with whom we have been organizing these BK Talks. And she will introduce our panelists tonight and run the show. So, Saskia, thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I feel like a game master somehow in the middle of this atrium. Fantastic to all have you. For those of you who feel comfortable to come closer, we have seats here in the front. As said, my name is Saskia van Steen. I'm the director of the International Architecture Biennale of Rotterdam. I have been for a little over 2 years, which I do with great passion. And I think that passion was at the root of the question by the chair of the daily board of Archiprix to maybe reflect on what Archiprix could mean and how we could somehow situate it in a larger question of societal urgencies. I think there's no small words for it. We will not talk so much about IABR, but we will talk about my other role, and that is that I'm also headmaster, together with Patricia Reed, a theoretician based in Berlin, at the Critical Inquiry Lab, which is based at the Eindhoven Design Academy. And we center stage research just as a practice. But we'll also not talk about that. To introduce myself a little bit further, my secret passion is on Disney. I'm very much intrigued by systemic questions, worlding, identity, both built and through media strategies. But all of that I will not talk about, but by means to share some of the questions that we will be addressing today is, of course, at the root of the future of design education as such. And I look around and I see a lot of people that are sort of my age. So the second ring maybe represents that future that we'll be talking about. And I clearly all invite you to raise your hand if you feel that something needs to be addressed. And what we will be addressing is, of course, a hand straight away. We will be addressing the questions on, with these marvelous deans around me of universities and academies. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us and reflecting on the future of education, and particularly design education, where we are, of course, facing multiple challenges: institutional, I would dare say political. We will get to that later. Navigating uncertainty, so we can't maybe depend on our own education as such. So how do we prepare for uncertain futures? What are the skills that we need? What are the topics that we'll be working on? Of course, climate change is absolutely at the heart of every practice at the moment, but also notions of solidarity, notions of equality, of equity, are maybe questioning if the discipline is even a valid position. Well, I'm going all out. We will talk about these questions throughout the afternoon, and we have 3 presentations by 3 of the nominated Archiprix finalists. It's a bit of a secret, but we're in the middle of the jury process. That said, for those of you who do not know Archiprix, it brings together all the most talented designers through the disciplines of interior, landscape, urban design, architecture, and weaves them into an array of some 25 to 30 projects, which are then weighed, and the jury, and an independent jury, actually points at where they feel the winners are, both either through topics or attitude. Well, we will celebrate that moment on June 7th. Okay, very long introduction. And I thought, because I'm here with the deans, maybe it could be a nice idea if I now stop or go back. Let's see if technology doesn't fail me. I know, you know who I am. Juliette Bekkering. Thank you for joining. You're, of course, Dean at the Technical University in Eindhoven, but I thought maybe you could share what you bring through your own education. What is still with you now when we talk about different temporalities? Can be a skill, can be an anecdote. What do you remember from your own education?
Does it? Yes. Well, I think that for me, my education was very important. I studied here in Delft, not in this building, but the building that burned down, and some decades ago now. And for me, it was very much a period of experimenting and of self-made projects, so we could organize our own projects and traveling abroad. And
humans with all our anxieties and future dreams and limits, and that was a very, very enriching experience for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're going to swap. It apparently works again.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Somebody who came all the way from Tilburg is Pieter Veenstra. So you represented the academy in Tilburg. And maybe if you join me, I'll give you my microphone also by ways of introduction, what you would bring to the conversation, what you still find important from your own education.
Well, I had the kind combination of educations. I started in Eindhoven. I didn't like it at all, but I made good friends. That's also all in the 80s. And there were quite some alternative people there. It was interesting. But I went to art school in Arnhem. There you had environmental design. And the people who were ruling that, teaching there, actually they switched from anything to anything. They design buildings, they do environments, you can do anything. So in this kind of free atmosphere, I picked up. And especially also in the practical attitude, when artists make things, or let me put it, in architecture, many discussions are about, are things possible? The engineer has the last word. And you know, in art, if you want to achieve something or make something, you go on and you just ask the impossible, and it happens. So that's somehow I took from my Arnhem period. Mm-hmm. And then there was some time for reflection, and I started architectural history in Amsterdam. And that, because I think some heritage from the time or legacy is also that it was also very much about thinking, which I'm still addicted to. Yes.
Thank you. Well, it was just to sort of set the stage. What we have done is actually ask 3 of the Archiprix nominated to present, and from their presentations we will start the conversation on topics at large. And I'm standing here, but I also would want to point and thank at Lene de Rauw and Jannik Bosman, who are the powerhouses behind me. So thank you for being here, and thank you for making all of this possible. I feel that I'm indebted to also share that I'm actually also, I stem from the arts, and I went to New York with 200 guilders, 200 euros, 400 guilders, and I became a bicycle runner, and all of a sudden I could not enter the main building anymore. I was part of an infrastructure. I was a young woman, blonde, 24, and I could not enter a building on Fifth Avenue, and that was my entry to architecture. Then I went to Columbia University, and the blob was center staged. The post-structuralist French philosophy, biology, the Greg Linds of this world. So I come from a total different angle, but I'm very happy to be here and share notes on where we are now and where indeed we are heading. With that said, I think this is a beautiful moment to give you the stage. I will sit where you are, so you are really in the center. Let me get... You are also from the KBK. And your project is titled Am I Grateful? Question mark between brackets. And your name is Nasma Alshutfa. Please give it up for the first presentation.
Thank you for having me. Oh, okay. From the beginning, I wanted to do something related with refugees and migration. And then, especially when all the political chaos here in the Netherlands and the tension was escalating about the migration, and then ending up with the collapse of the government in fighting off migration. Moreover, like whenever I tell people around me that I want to do something with migration and refugees, immediately the first question, like, are you designing a camp? So this was my first step, is that I'm not designing a camp. So I've lived in a lot of, as it says, and refugee centers in the Netherlands, and I went again and visited, and I had a lot of workshops and interviews there, and I felt that architecture was used as a tool to exclusion and to keep people away, especially that most of the camps are located in isolated areas and away from the city, and it's like reinforcing of invisibility. So I wanted to use architecture as a tool to show the invisible stories and all the experience that refugees are facing inside of these refugee centers. I made an installation and my project called I Am Grateful. I wanted to focus on the journey in the Dutch refugee centers, but I used my thesis to tell the story from the beginning, because I should also show how refugees take a decision of leaving home, of leaving all these familiar spaces, and they would never maybe go back, or they would never see it again, and then the journey, the dangerous journey that to the final destination, and in this case is the Netherlands. So they have been to spaces that nobody can imagine. So we should, I say that because we should understand that these people are having a traumas, mentally and physically, and then they come here to live in the, as it says. So my project is I'm Grateful. So I named it with this name because whenever I went and talked to refugees, most of them were really afraid of criticizing their current situation. So in my opinion, you can criticize and be grateful at the same time. So this is what I did. It's like an installation. And I made a lot of rooms, 50 rooms, and I categorized the room into 4 categories. The first category is the actual room. I rebuilt exactly the rooms as it is. So actually this is a deeply personal journey. So I decided to tell my story first and see how it will be, and then including other stories, sharing other stories. So this is the first category of the rooms I made. And then paper rooms, because within this journey, your life become papers. Whatever you say, it's not reliable. You have to prove everything. You have to, whatever you say, you have to give them an evidence, a proof that you are telling the truth or whatever. So, and also for coming from a different country to the Netherlands, where in the Netherlands everything with forms and papers, and we don't know what is this, everything. So your life literally become paper. So I try to show how it is using space. Mostly all these papers are giving to refugees from the beginning of their coming, and mostly it's in English or even in Dutch. Then you still have to translate, and sometimes in Arabic, but even if you come from a different country, then you don't even find your own language, and then you don't really understand what you should do. And then waiting. I think waiting is the biggest enemy of any refugee, because you have to wait for unknown waiting. You don't know, is it 1 year, 1 month, 10 years, 15 years? You definitely don't know. So it becomes definitely your enemy in these centers. And lastly is the emotional rooms. I tried to pick some kind of emotions and then translating it through a room. So each room has an emotion, each room has a story. So I used space to tell or to translate these emotions. So now like within my graduation project, it was totally personal, because I don't want to say that I didn't dare, but I was not really confident that I can also bring other stories, because I didn't know how it will be. So now I'm confident and brave enough to develop the project, and now I'm I will develop it and make it like a collective installation, and it will add different room with different kind of stories and people. And that's it.
Don't worry. Just so you used your own, let's say, situated knowledge in order to mirror a fundamental systemic flaw. These words that went by, freedom, expression, is this something that you recognize from your own studies, or would you use other words as a contemporary learning, developing young architect? Well, I can... To me, it seems, well, of course, there's the situated knowledge of your own quite touching, moving story. And, of course, the fact that you hint at the complexities of living this. But it is also not merely... I also felt while studying your project that you try to distance yourself and become a sort of journalist, maybe. I'm not trying to force you into... You can also say, hey, you misinterpreted. But what are the core values you feel that you are bringing to the practice at this moment with your project?
Yeah, like from the beginning, I wanted to because I really appreciate, or I want to do something related with human rights, with equality, but then I'm also like a bit old, I don't know, educated or whatever, but architecture to me was like practical, designing furniture, designing rooms and beauty, but then I wanted to do something with human rights. Then how can architecture used as a tool for such topics, for such issues? How can it be social? How can it be collective? So I think, I explored this through my project, and I believe I used space to tell the narrative. And use,
Madeleine, maybe I may ask of you. You were one of the first that I literally sort of looked at the curriculum some 4 years ago, and you introduced this notion of revolution. Can you maybe sort of either mirror the project or share a little bit the choice to put this word in the ethos or at the core of the curriculum?
Yes, I think we started in 2017 with the installation of a new research group, and 1 year later another research group. The first one is high density energy landscape, and the second one was architecture and circular thinking. And then we realized, also in not only research but education, that the climate change is really so huge. It is our responsibility as educators to change our curricula and also add new topics in it. Talking about my own education, I do remember I designed a museum, a library, a cinema, all those kinds of huge big buildings I never made one myself, but that's not an issue. But I think nowadays times are changed so much. So I really recognize all the things you're mentioning. It is very important to talk about justice. It's very important about human rights, about developing new narratives in our curricula. So we started calling our curricula Revolution Planets. And now, since a few years we call it, it's our climate curriculum. So all design studios are in one way or the other related to one of the climate issues. And therefore, I think interdisciplinary education is becoming more and more important. And I also think it's important to invite others than designers in your schools, like writers, journalists, politicians, policymakers, scientists, because I think we have to change many things in education. So I really like your project where you tried to make this installation and try to use this as a kind of narrative between you as a designer and the people you're designing it for, so you can have this conversation about it.
Yeah. Will you be furthering this project?
Yes, I am already. Like now, because as I said, it was like an installation of a personal story, so now it will be like more collective.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe, Claudio, could you reflect on being a educator at the inside through the lens of the project and how that grew? Or
I think Nasma's project is one of the prime examples of our curriculum. I think the approach that Nasma had among other students, but in particular Nasma, is how do we reconsider, how do we look at space, and how do we understand space as a charged entity that is not just something to design or something to practically solve. It's not about innovations or solutions, but maybe more intentions. And also, I always like the idea of the lens. Students are lenses, and the distance and the angle and the light will show something. And then the deeper you go, the more difficult it is to see things. But if you have the right condition, the right lens, everything will shine through. And we are looking at things that are that nobody's speaking about. I mean, it's an amazing project. It's a very courageous project, and we are very, very, very proud of her and all our students. Our students have perhaps a more personal approach. We sit in an art institution, so we get different inputs. We are not surrounded with architects, luckily. And let's say also the language and the tools that we get are very different, and therefore we have this very enriching environment in which things come out differently, and it's very political, and that's also something that is very, very important in 2025. With genocides going on, I think it's very, very important that our schools embrace political problems and make it an open discussion with the students. I think it's one of our pride at KBK, that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very beautiful sum up. We'll keep it at that, but maybe we'll return for the Q&A later. I invite forward Daan de Jong, who was educated at the Academie van Bouwkunst in Rotterdam, to share a little bit about the project entitled Every Then, and I give you my microphone.
Thanks so much. Card clickers.
Card clicker.
How to do this. Point anywhere. Okay. Hi everyone. In the coming minutes, I would like to talk with you about time. Starting off by sharing a Maori saying that's been on my mind for quite some time now. And it goes, I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on the past. And sadly, we show little sensitivity for this wisdom. We live in a world where everything seems to revolve about the now. Politicians barely look beyond the next election, and every square meter must serve an immediate purpose. This short-term thinking has led us on a dead-end path. The climate crisis urges us to rethink our relationship with the future. But that's where we encounter a challenge. The future can feel vague and abstract and is clouded by uncertainty. The further we look ahead, the wider the cone of uncertainty becomes, and the more blurred the image gets. The climate crisis is therefore also a crisis of perspective. This issue is linked to our temporal view, and perhaps the solution lies there as well. Our Western perception of time is linear, as something that moves along a line from the past, through the present, into the future, where the now is merely a fleeting moment of seconds or minutes in which we exist. This concept of time is keeping us trapped in the present. The challenge is to move beyond this Western notion of time and to expand our temporal imagination. Indigenous cultures, where they have a different perception of time, can help us take this leap. For example, we can draw inspiration from the fluid notion of time known as every when, a concept that is found in Aboriginal traditions. And in this view, past, present, and future are intertwined, as if they are moving within the same space. In my graduation project, I explored ways to incorporate the philosophy of every when into design thinking and practice to reimagine our relationship with the future. But how do you develop a design approach that is rooted within the every when mindset? There is no step-by-step guide or predefined method to expand our temporal perspective. To find a starting point, I turn to 3 media forms that are part of everyday designer's toolkit. And I'm talking about the map, the model, and the narrative. The 3 essential techniques help us to communicate our ideas as designers. The problem is, however, that they are also bound by the same conventions that keep our view of time so limited. And one persistent issue is that we use them in a way that they are based on a vanishing point in time. They show the present, the past, or the future, but never all at once. My approach focused on The Hague, a city shaped by diverging timescales. Its landscape reflects deep geological layers, while its political history is ever-changing. These forces intertwine, making The Hague an ideal case study for every when. And by connecting different temporal layers and scales, I created a foundation for new stories. Stories that offer glimpses of a possible future. These narratives took shape in what I call zinnebeelden, or emblems of time. They are spatial representations that challenge to expand our temporal field of vision. They make you wonder, am I looking at something that exists now, something that once was, or something that could be in the future? By blurring the boundaries between past, present, and future, it opens our minds to a state of every when. And these zinnebeelden come together in the moving map that was just on display, and it's also on display in the back of the exposition as well. But they've also been translated into individual spatial installations with their own spoken narratives. They each represent a possible future in which a culture of long-term thinking is fostered. Ultimately, the project led to an exhibition that was on display in The Hague, where the installations, maps, and narrative converged. And the centerpiece during this exhibition was the Act of Every When, a manifesto that laid out 7 principles to foster long-term thinking among designers, policymakers, and leaders. These 7 principles serve as a starting point for discussing the meaning of every when in the practice of design. And I'm curious if we can explore ways to integrate the every when philosophy into design education as well. And on that note, I would like to finish. Thank you.
Who wants to pick up on the provocation by Daan? Let's implement every when into education. How would that land in a curriculum?
think it's a beautiful, inspiring project. And to be honest, when I was first walking through the exhibition, I thought, hey, that's constant, you know, the models. But it's much more. And I think the installation, this is just a small wall, but I think that installation on the image is beautiful. But I'm really triggered, let's say, also by the start of your presentation, when you say, you quote, I walk backwards into the future. That you say the climate crisis is a crisis of perspective. And I think, yeah, that's maybe the core of what we have to do. That we as an institute, a school, but our students, that they develop a perspective. That's the only way forward. But yeah, moving forward is also looking backward. And Javier is also working on a big exhibition called Indigenous Intelligence. I think that's very important. We can learn so much from sources that we didn't know before and that we have to explore. I think that's very present in our school here, faculty, and I think the way you express that is really beautiful.
I'm now also intrigued by what kind of pedagogies would you feel could somehow transpose the knowledge that you want to evoke with every when? What kind of, is it the body, the mind, the heart, where or how would you teach the course every when yourself?
I would say all of the above, but let's start with these media forms that we use as designers, I would say. And the realization that the way we use those media forms are also connected to political ideas or our perception of time. And for me, the whole experiment was about sort of finding other ways to use those media forms as well. So I would, in a course, I would start there, yeah.
So with different media?
Well, maybe the same media, but in a different way. So, for example, what I found interesting is when I started making the Everywhen map, I felt this sort of weight that I needed to make a map that had a scale and one perspective, for example. But that doesn't work in the philosophy of Everywhen because you need to have multiple perspectives. So what does it mean to draw a map from the philosophy of Everywhen?
Yeah, I was not going to talk about Disney, but now that you've forced me to, Disney says imagination is the model of which reality is built, and he turns it around. And I'm actually also intrigued by that you use the Maori saying, but it is actually also, I think, in Greek philosophy that they perceive history as something in the front, whereas in Northern European countries we look at the past is behind. Well, by which I'm just trying to evoke, how do we make sure, let's say that we are now in a Western reality, in a Western curriculum, that we don't capitalize on other, what would be a just way to move forward in getting the kinds of knowledge we need to have in order to truly be ready without harvesting or capitalizing? In other words, what would be our own Dutch indigenous understanding of Everywhen? If I'm making sense or not. I don't know, is somebody who wants to pick up on that question of how maybe planetary systems are shifting and our discipline also has to adjust to the fact that we are truly a planet, that the North and the South are a whole. I see Juliette taking the mic. Yes, go for it, it's on.
It's on, yeah. You hear me? Yes. Yeah. I always have the tendency to eat the microphone, so sorry for that. But no, I'm really intrigued by your design, and well, as Dick said, it makes me think of Constant, how we develop this kind of narrative of Homo ludens. And what I was wondering, because finally you studied architecture, I guess. Sorry?
Urbanism.
And where do you see the role of built form in your narrative of this backwards future?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and a tough one as well. I'm still figuring out what the answer is, to be honest. But But I think part of the answer could be in the rituals that I sort of used in my project as well. They can be built rituals as well. So, for example, I'm not going in depth in the project, but there's this thing of repeating the act of building. I mean, that could be part of the role as a designer as well, that it's not just designing and then it's done, that you're part of the ritual of building, which can be intergenerational as well.
Thank you.
More abstraction. Intergenerational justice. I mean, I'm intrigued that you colonize an infrastructure, which of course has a resemblance to the Extinction Rebellion, but besides that, you turn it into a public space. So that is also an answer. But this answer was more poetic. I see you nodding. You want to respond to Daan's project?
Possibly because while Daan was talking about, I was thinking, aren't we as educators maybe sometimes too much busy with here and now and too little with continuity and the cultural aspect of building? And then I'm not talking about cultural in a sense of a decade, like we all just said, in which decade we were educated, but cultural in the sense of ages. And being more conscious of that, but also thinking about intergenerational solidarity as a matter of what if we would not know when we would live? What choices would we make? Not knowing when in time, maybe now or far in the past or far in the future, would we make different choices if we do it like that? And it's also one of the things from political philosophy to think and decide on that basis. But I think that could really relate to the notion of continuity that we sometimes tend to forget, especially in architecture education, where we ask people, is what you're doing new? Is it relevant right now? But shouldn't we ask, is it relevant both in the past and in the future and right now, all over time?
Yeah. So you're indeed introducing a intergenerational solidarity. Is that then through the use, for instance, of material culture or the knowledge that we disseminate, or what would be the core values that you feel we need to transpose throughout the generations?
I think very, very concretely in architectural education there are certain things we have to teach people that are always relevant, that have been relevant in architecture 1,000 years ago and are right now, so we can maybe assume that they are in another 1,000 years as well, which in which architecture is a very physical thing. It always leads to physical form, but that does not mean that we kind of reduce ourselves to problem solvers who make buildings, but the physical form, what do we leave to future generations? Are we making monuments, or are we very consciously not making monuments or unmaking them? I think those notions are really relevant if you consider a timeless maybe approach to architecture that you could learn from this very interesting project.
Yeah. Marcel?
Just to connect to that, because I think what I really liked about Daan's project is actually that he broadens, let's say, architecture beyond, let's say, physical forms, and that he connects use, experiences, and in different ages. And I think for me, one of the most interesting parts, let's say, is this ambiguity that you add, let's say. So you put all these layers on top of each other, and there's not one layer that is important, but it's the combination, and you sort of, and it's always also the observation that you make yourself. It's always a personal choice that you can make as an observer. So I think that's really important when you want to, create this continuity. Then you need also this ambiguity at the same time.
We leave it at that because we have one more presentation. Thank you so much, Daan de Jong. Charlotte Delobbe, there you are, sorry. Yes, you're right in front. That's a blind spot just in front of me. You will talk about a project entitled Living with Drought-Prone Landscapes, and you were educated at l'Université de Liège, and I would say the next 5 minutes are yours.
Yeah, University of Liège, but also to Delft right now. So, is this one? Yeah. So, welcome to my presentation. I will briefly present my graduation thesis in landscape architecture. So, starting from the scale of the arid climates, my work dives into the original climate zone and their expansion worldwide. And so my work started with a case study in India where people have learned to adapt to arid climates and to live with it. And then to adapt such techniques to Rwanda, where now people are facing drought challenges and the landscape is vulnerable to global warming. So currently in Rwanda, farmers are particularly vulnerable to droughts and irregular rain patterns, as agriculture represents directly and indirectly 90% of the jobs, but also 30% of the country's GDP. So usually irrigation systems are unaffordable for local farmers, so they solely rely on the rain seasons to irrigate their crops, especially in areas where the access to nearby water sources like rivers is difficult. So it is why it was important for me to learn from the case study in India where people implemented a arid traditional water system, and that's why those techniques became relevant. Because in northern India, the people of Jaisalmer have reintroduced a water cycle in a desertic land by implementing earthen embankments to catch as much water as possible during the warm rainy seasons of the year. So after learning from such a system, I then focused on the town of Riabega in eastern Rwanda, which is an area of the country that is facing current drought challenges as well as deforestation and intensive agriculture practices, which makes the landscape even more vulnerable to drought challenges. So learning from the Kadin, which was the traditional water system in India, this new water system connecting the town's green and blue structure from the highest point of the topography to the lowest point aims to collect rainwater and rainwater runoff to store it in reservoirs and agriculture basins, which are strategically placed on the topography lines. And I will then later on zoom onto the orange part of the master plan to design a new town center and a transitional space between the commercial part of Riabega and the residential areas. So one of the main aspects of my work was to design multiple design interventions that together create the new green and blue network, that is the water system. They are all designed with local materials and built in local building techniques to be easily implemented by the locals, because I really wanted my work to be directly useful for the people working and living in that area. So the master plan does not only work with topography, but also with the dry and rainy season cycle, providing irrigation for the crops, as well as different crop type solutions to adapt it to the long dry season and droughts. So the basins and reservoirs are working together in order to, during the rain season, plant around those basins, and during the dry seasons, plant in those areas where the moisture has been fostered for natural crop irrigation. So this would change the landscape from overexploited by intensive agriculture to a landscape with more possibilities for agroforestry, with the water system implemented in the lowest point of the topography and the highest point being utilized for other types of activities such as productive forests. But also other types of activities such as poultry and dairy farming can be implemented in order to reach a multivalent landscape, while locals are not solely relying on agriculture anymore. So the addition of a system of cooperatives is also a great way for rural communities transformation as well as sustainability. So working together in cooperatives does not only help to tackle poverty, but also creates collaboration to involve locals in building their own water system and public spaces, enhancing a sense of place and attachment to the landscape. And the large-scale intervention focuses on designing for more qualitative public spaces within the town center itself. There are multiple possibilities to redevelop green woodlands to attract endangered species, as well as creating micro-humid climates where people can rest during the high temperatures of the day. So the design of the town center is based on how people are using the space to implement a design that is the mirror of the local culture. This resulted in reshaping the entire road profile to create a unified public space shared between the different users. So to summarize, all interventions and designs involving multiple stakeholders have been thought to offer climate resilience throughout the coming years, so communities, landscape, and the agricultural system have the proper tools in their hands to tackle the ongoing drought challenges. Yeah.
Thank you. We just started by talking about which site do you feel entitled to speak about. So I'm now challenging you. What made you choose for this particular topic and this particular continent, or context, I should say?
So actually the idea was because I previously worked with water that were flooding spaces, and I thought it was also important to tackle the aspect where water is actually not there anymore, or where people used to live in water and now they're facing climates that are where the water is not present anymore. And so I dived into Rwanda because I knew people from Rwanda. So for me, it was important that I did not arrive in an area where I was a stranger. I really wanted to address the people's stories, hear their stories, and create a collaboration with them, and therefore a project that is offering real solutions that they can directly use locally. And so when I was on site, that's what I liked the most. I met many experts that I learned so much from other people in other contexts. That was also an important aspect in my graduation thesis, and how and what I could do with the graduation thesis, in other words. Yeah, I think that answers.
Very fair. Is there someone who wants to respond or question Charlotte's project? If not, I will ask, who is then the person, who would you offer it to? Is it the community, or is it the region, or is it the government, or how do you hope that it would be, in your dream scenario, picked up?
So I've been in contact with actually different stakeholders, the Minister of Environment in Rwanda. So that's why on my last slide here I addressed, for example, the government, because for the protective landscape, because I also implemented part of their master plan for the whole country, because I really wanted to create a design that is addressing governmental ambitions, but also local ambitions. So I met the minister, I met also local agronomists that directly worked with the farmers in that area. And so that's why I have addressed different scales throughout my thesis in order to also address the different stakeholders. Yeah.
Fabulous. And yes, of course, go for it. Your microphone is on. Yeah, it is.
Okay. Yeah, very nice project. Yeah, just nice projects. Wow, that's evident. It's Archiprix. But it's really intriguing also when you think that water is going to be the major problem of the world. Or at least that's what they're telling. That will be a major problem. And of course, you have explored in your project this specific condition. Do you think that your project would be usable also for other locations, that you could kind of spread out. Is it makeable? Are water landscapes makeable? And maybe you explored it during your graduation thesis, that you discovered what the impact of designing with water is.
So is this strategy an export product?
So the idea was really to actually use this work as a starting point to show that it is possible to work in those areas. So it's kind of like opening the door on how to tackle those challenges in drought-prone landscapes. That's why my title is quite large, because I really wanted to say that this is the start of a conversation with tackling drought challenges in different areas. Well, here in this case, especially Africa, for example. That is why I not only did the master plan with all those disaster interventions, because right next to it there was a real grid, if you remember. I really wanted to explain that there are multiple opportunities and interventions that they are small scales, but together they can create an entire project. And so the idea was that all those little interventions can also be replicated in other parts of the world that are currently facing the same challenges.
Dirk, please respond.
Yeah, well, maybe first I was thinking, I think this is really a big difference. You were asking us about our study period, and what's of course really different is that now we have this international community in our schools and projects that try to address issues in many different parts of the world. I think, of course, there's a lot of discussion about that. How can you do that? Myself work with Marina Tabassum, our professor from Bangladesh, on flood-prone areas, the opposite. I think you can learn a lot from seeing all these different contexts that you can encounter in the world. And I think it also can bring you new perspectives. We were talking about the crisis of perspectives, also to the issues we have to address here in our own context. But still, but I think that's also, Saskia, the question you asked. For many students, it's the question, and maybe that's also something we can discuss. So how can you bring this knowledge indeed to the context where you've been working in your project? We had I think last month here, a visit from Yasmin Lari from Pakistan, who was actually challenging me and the whole school. It's all great what you do with the students, but how can you actually indeed bring that to the place you've been studying and working? And I know it's an ambition of a lot of our students, and we see many projects also in the Archiprix selection, but how to do that? Mm-hmm. So it's also a question.
Yeah. I'm going to open up, so if anybody wants to pose a question either to one of the presenters or the deans, feel free, raise your hand, I'll run your way. But I will pose the question that Dirk puts on the table, and I was implicitly addressing this question of you actually engage with stakeholders, you analyze the local context, you are working on different scales. Which kind of curriculum or aspects do you feel your generation and the ones, or all of us, should embrace? Or where were you, if you had a magic wand and you could make a curriculum now, what would definitely be in it?
I think, I'm not sure if my answer is going to answer your question, but I think what I also wanted to show with this project is that landscape architecture is much more than sometimes what we think it is. For example, in Belgium, where I come from, when I say I'm a landscape designer, they directly think I'm going to design the garden. And I want to show with this project that we can push the boundaries of our field, of what our field means. And so landscape architecture in this case is not only designing landscape or vegetation plants, etc. It's actually multi-scalar approaches, multi-layers approaches, and that one discipline doesn't only work on its own, it needs a collaboration with other disciplines. Mm-hmm. So that's my view on this.
I want to touch base, Claudio, on that very little sentence where you said, "We are not an architecture school, thank God."
Oh, yeah, that was just...
there was a slip of the tongue, but, you know, very generously picking up on that.
Yeah.
But well, because I know that you are trained as an architect.
I'm also, I studied here, I teach at the KBK, but I also teach at the Rotterdam Architectural School, the RAVB, and I also am a practicing architect, and perhaps it was a little bit of some pepper on the conversation, but yeah, I'm very how can I say, I really appreciate the environment that we have at KBK, because we don't have, we are in interior architecture, so for us the question is like, how do we look at space from the inside out? So how do we actually conceive this interior and break outside of this interior? So what are the limits of our profession? And also, you know, what do we want the students to achieve? So I think that there are a lot of questions, and it's a very fertile environment which was created 10 years ago, and we're still it's a trial and error education. So we're always constantly learning from our alumni, from the field. We are not just inside, but we are often outside. And yeah, I think that it's very refreshing to be in an environment without too many dogmas, and that's what I really appreciate from KBK, from inside. Yeah.
So you're implicitly saying our discipline is really hijacked by the dogmas.
Yeah, and I also think that what was said before, it's we need more different disciplines within the field of architecture. Architecture is not just designing, boom, gets built. We're swimming in a constant flow of uncertainties. The role of the architect is getting thinner and thinner. Due to technologies, due to a lot of different factors that influence the way architecture is even created. So, I mean, even in my discipline, I curate exhibitions. Yeah, I'm an architect. I'm not a curator. I mean, everything is changing, and it's changing very fast, and that's why we need to expand what is an architect, and what is a designer, what is a spatial designer. Actually, what is space? That's a question that is like it's the elephant in the room, and who is entitled to space, and there are perhaps too many questions.
Well, we have half an hour, so who wants to pick up?
If it's okay, I want to react on what you're saying, because a few weeks ago there was a report. It was the result of a big survey among all the schools in the Netherlands, and the request was coming from the college van Rijksadviseurs en het Architectenregister. And in the first chapter, it was said that the architect is no longer the architect as we used to know him or her, but it's a social spatial problem solver. And I think that's a very interesting way of saying it. And I think also looking at your project, it is not only about the design; it's also about the capability or the ability to work with the community and to talk with the stakeholders. And of course, it's always difficult when from Europe going over there. So that has a certain sensitivity. But nevertheless, I think it's very important that we still try to do it in one way or the other. And also, your project is really beautiful, and I really like it. Thank you so much.
Maybe who wants to respond on this notion of this precarity of the discipline and how to prepare for that? For instance, we are I'll give you some time to think about it, involved in this House Europe project as IABR, and we actually try to break the cycle of demolish and rebuild, which is very prevalent in the Dutch context. So even if a building is in top quality, it has become an asset and it operates in a financial reality. The thin facade has been mentioned. We can easily, stack many complexities on our profession and how to operate both in the reality that The complexities are getting more complex, while at the same time we need to move forward and create the perspectives. Anyway, you raised your hand.
Yeah, well, I think that it's quite a challenging period now. Well, it always is challenging. Right? Maybe that's also reflecting on the past and looking to the future. But I think that what really has changed is that the profession has become so broad, from the architect with his little office to the globally working architect or urbanist with offices of 1,000+ people. And on the other hand, when we studied, that was non-existent, that to work abroad so much. But also the multidisciplinarity that has become more and more important. I think that maybe that's also one of the things that our university is focusing on. So within our university or our faculty, we have multidisciplines, so building physics, construction, and urban systems, real estate. So I think that more and more the architect is becoming broader, is becoming also an entrepreneur, also a visionary, or an artist, or a technician, etc. And I think that that's also the choice that you make as a faculty, that you have different kind of students and different kind of architects, of designers that are being developed. You have people that want to be, these generalists, the generalisten, or more specialists focusing on a very specific topic. And I think that a faculty should function as a place where, well, in the past I think that we used to call also the faculty like a supermarket, where you can kind of make your own dish, where you can assemble, and that we have the responsibility as architectural educators to facilitate that you can provide all the information that you need.
Yeah. You were grabbing your mic.
Yeah, I was thinking whether I agree or not, but I think part of the story, and also this last project really illustrates that, is that no matter whether you are the engineer or you are the artist or you are a strategist, I think architecture is very much about attitude as well. And this last project really shows an attitude that is related to a sensitivity for the people. Because it's very much, you could say, it's like a global problem-solving project, but I don't think that is the real intention. The real intention is creating links between local problem-solving, very much related to people who are actually living there, are actually working with you as an architect. And I think that's one of the things that might also be the solution to this broad perspective of all kinds of architects we have. Are they all able to work with other people on their designs? Are they able to step over the ego and make these connections with people they're working for, but also with the other people around them who have different talents and different perspectives, and bring that all together? So bringing architecture also as like a collective cultural deed instead of a personal one.
Anybody want to pose a question here? Can be small, can be large. Yes, please.
It's maybe it's maybe not a question, but also to add to that, I think what I would like to see emphasized in the curricula or our field is indeed the responsibility we have as designers because to me the core of designing and all of these educations is showing something that is not there yet. And indeed, it's the climate crisis is a crisis of perspectives, and also I think of a lot of fear. And I think we as designers can show that maybe a future that we need to go towards is not that scary. So I think, to me, that's also a really important part, and that's also in my project. Sorry to do this, but what I encountered is that indeed by talking to different people in different levels, like citizens, but also and using different methods,
But yeah, it's all about like showing them in different ways, what the future could look like, and that's maybe the core.
Okay, now this was a small pitch to reflect on the post-growth city and introduce a circular economy based on the work of the donut economy, in a nutshell. And you have 4 scenarios where you sketch different perspectives on how we could live differently. So scenario is very much at the core of your design proposal. But back to your question. How to teach responsibilities, right, in the end?
Maybe.
Well, I would say that.
Thank you, Saskia. Yeah, maybe in the introduction you talked about your own education and where we are today. To make that bridge, how do we view this aspect of freedom and self-development in education? And how do our students look at this and the people in the room, in the circle?
That was going to be my last question, but that's fantastic. Then we are wrapping up, so that's good. So is there even, I mentioned this idea of historic path dependency, right? So that means actually that this generation does not have the freedom that we had. And I say we, I'm a product of the 90s, because the challenges are not as free, yet need perspectives, I would say. Because I'd also feel that politically we are harvesting on the short term, or the electoral lack of imagination is actually part of that. But to return to your question, do you feel that you have the freedom of the world? I don't know.
To make it quite concrete, what I was missing during the academy was to be able to fail. Because when you have the ability to fail, the freedom to fail, that gives you the freedom to explore as well. It was halfway my academy time that there was this studio, and in the first week, the teacher said, "We don't have an end product. We're not sure what we're going to do. This is an experiment, and it's all about the process. It's not about the final product." And that gave me the freedom to explore my own position as a designer. And then I think that should be more common in design education. But I'm really curious what you guys think.
And how would a failed project, how would that look like?
Well, eventually, failure is also just having of course, the freedom to take a direction and then come to the conclusion yourself as a student that maybe that's not the way you should go. And in your academic career, that would mean that you failed a studio. But I would love to see that you could explain as a student that you took a certain direction. You can explain why you did that and what you learned from it, and then you would still be able to finish that studio, for example.
Okay. So that's on the combination of the different temporalities and the moment that there's an end term and you receive a bad grading. Anybody else want to respond to this question of freedom?
I think failure is very important for freedom. And failure is very important in education as well. It's one of the formal things we added to our curriculum, I think already 10 or 15 years ago. Like qualification 1 is pioneering, and a big part of pioneering is accepting failure and dealing with it. Because I think if you have the freedom to fail and you can manage failure and you can work with it, then you can take responsibility. And responsibility and freedom go together really well. Mm-hmm. It's a different kind of freedom maybe than we felt we had in the zeros or even earlier. But it's a great form of freedom that we all need in this profession.
So we need to basically carve out that freedom maybe. And I was going to ask actually somebody who's very specialized in the correlation between language and architecture, if we need other words and literally design the words for the new phase. And I was going to actually look at somebody who's very much into tools, data, and technology to question what would be the next steps in terms of crafting our discipline. I still wanted to talk about a performance that I saw here that talked about redesigning justice through the lens of architecture. And I found it very intriguing that it was a performative start. So everybody had to get out of that head into the here and now, into the heart, into the body, into the cells. And then they went hardcore into how to redesign justice in design. In other words, it is an immense topic, and I think we really are at the forefront of toppling maybe what we know, how we know. The Enlightenment maybe is overrated, but I'm still a cognitive, rational person, so how to balance all of that out? But to question what knowledge is, and to question the fundaments of our discipline, I think, is what we will be engaging in for the next period. But for that, we need knowledge. It's a long introduction to introduce your final words on the next exhibition. Javier, please join me. Thank you, first of all, for your lovely invitation to spend some time together on this question of what is knowledge, what is Archiprix I mean, we could go on for hours. I would want to talk about what is it to be a talent. Is it a burden, or is it maybe something to also celebrate? Although I'm totally for the commons, we all have different capacities to bring to the table. But you will share something on the next exhibition, and you are Javier Arpa Fernandez, the leader also of BK Talks. But please take us along. Indigenous knowledges? Nee? Right? Did I say it correctly? Please give it up for Javier.
No. This was just meant to be goodbye, like I always say. So thank you, Saskia, so much for this introduction. What I do whenever we finish our BK Talks is to say goodbye and present the next activities that we are celebrating. I don't know if this is working actually, but all I wanted to do is this actually working? Say that again. The top one. I should know it. Okay, yeah, anyway, so I just first of all would like to thank everybody who has been here, all our guests, and especially the students who decided or contributed to the game. So sometimes I felt that you were in some kind of tribunal or something like that. So thank you very much for participating in this format. All I wanted to talk about is the upcoming activity that we are organizing. Is the next exhibition opening in 2 weeks. It's called Indigenous Intelligence, Ancient Knowledge, Current Design. So we have, it started with an open call. A lot of members of our community, faculty, students decided to participate and send in lots of work. So our idea is to bring us to different places of the world, starting from here, from the Netherlands actually, and try to understand what indigenous cultures have to tell us, have to show us, have to teach us. So these are just some teaser images of what we will be seeing in 2 weeks. For April 1st, we will probably honoring the land, many lands, and we will be talking about nature. So yesterday I was trying to I'm trying to work on the text for the exhibition. And yesterday I was taking some notes of everything I'm learning with this show. And it's maybe something that I want to share. Will be only 50 seconds, so don't worry about it. But I started writing about everything we're learning these days with the whole team, with all the participation that we have. And then my notes are something like this. It says something like, architecture is no longer neutral. What you're seeing here is a project I visited 2 weeks ago, which deeply impacted my understanding of architecture. Probably you know it already. It's not that new. So some notes on that note are: architecture is no longer neutral. In the face of climate breakdown and ecological collapse, architecture must take a stance. The era of isolated, extractive urbanism is over. The built environment must become an active force for repair, regeneration, and coexistence. Let's reject carbon-heavy, profit-driven models that ignore their consequences. Let's embrace an architecture that is permeable, interdependent, regenerative, climatic, multi-species, and responsive. Architecture must transform now. The future is porous, shared, alive. It belongs within ecosystems, not in defiance of them. Architecture should prioritize livability over profit. The future is not about growth, but about repurposing and activating what already exists. Architecture must change immediately, and education must include the conversation on geopolitics, spatial justice, democracy, tolerance, environmental activism, care, identity politics, feminist studies and practices, climate justice, extractivism, human and non-human rights, among many others. This is not idealism, it is necessity. So these are my notes for the exhibition I'm organizing. Welcome next 1st of April. Thank you very much.
Well, I think we have a to-do list now. In all seriousness, I invite you to the bar that is now opened, and please center the conversation around the future of education. Thank you to the deans, thank you to the Archiprix nominators, and see you next time.